Okay, looks like the internet has allowed me to besmirch it once more with another stream of Odinmade Hero. Yeah, it looks like we're good. Okay. A week feels like forever, and at the same time, no time at all now. I get a lot of time to work through a few more days of Handmade Hero and then really think about what it was I even did instead of just going, okay, time to do the next day of code. Just jumping from one day to the next. It's like sinking in a bit more. But it's also giving me an appreciation for how little is really being done in an hour in the grand scheme of things. I've got my diffs up this time for the first time. And actually, this is a bit more than I was expecting. We got 267 new lines and 100 lines were thrown away. And the same thing for day 87. So days 86 and 87 is what we'll cover today. In the previous stream, I covered days 84 and 85, and really both last week and this week were all about getting the ground texture rendering such that it looks like we're actually walking across a game world of some kind. Where we left off, we had this tiny little ground texture in this, what is this, 256 by 256 square pixels. And we want this to actually cover everything, right? So that we've got something that kind of looks like a game world. We still have a whole bunch of issues, like the fact that we keep walking behind trees because things aren't sorted properly. And these are things that Casey continues to mention over and over, but it's partially mostly related to the fact that we don't have a render at this point in the series. But that's coming up real quick, as I've been talking about for now probably like 2 months. I knew we were getting close, and it's finally here. These are the last 2 days, days 86 and 87, before Casey kind of switches gears and starts working on the software render, and he starts breaking down things more and more with respect to doing rendering for games, right? And so I'm glad that the format is what it is now, even though like it's another adjustment and I have to figure out how to do the stream in this new way, and it's also happening less often. So every single time I come back now, it feels like I have to shake off a little bit more rust, but after like 5 or 10 minutes, I feel like I can kind of get into a swing of things and start talking about everything that was changed and why it was changed, and really settle it for myself that, I know what those couple of days were about, if I can use grammar properly, and appreciate why it makes sense to be then doing the thing that we're doing in the next day or the next couple of days, next week, whatever. It happens in chunks. Sometimes Casey decides he wants to get something done and it only takes a day, maybe two. Sometimes it's a whole week-long effort, but with the render, as we'll see, it's going to be a continual thing. The ground stuff took a while to get it to the point where it'll be by the time we're done with today's stream, but the render is going to take maybe like 2 or 3 times as long. I know just to like get all of the things implemented, it'll take at least a month's worth of streams of me just like working through each thing, maybe more. So this is going to be kind of really ratcheting down on this topic for the next while. I'm going to try and appreciate as much of it as I can, because this is the topic that's been most interesting to me out of what I've already seen of Handmade Hero. Maybe things will change as we get a little bit deeper here, but for now, we'll just get through these last couple of days of dealing with the ground. So where are my notes? I don't have my notes. I need to check out the right day here. So day 85, yeah, like I was just showing, we wrapped up and we had that one little square. And heading into day 86, I'll just bring up my notes so I can try and refresh myself on sort of the big points here. Again, I don't want to sit here and read through all of them because they're probably not very good, and that's just way too boring. But the thing that Casey was trying to toy with, and he wasn't sure that he was going to go this way, whether he's going to go this way or not in day 86, but he just decides to throw, I wouldn't say caution to the wind, but he decides to just roll the dice and see what happens by aligning the ground buffers to the individual world chunks. And this way, when a chunk becomes out of range of wherever the game camera is or wherever the player is, right? Because the camera right now is still fixed to wherever the player is. As soon as that chunk becomes out of range of the player, or out of a certain range, once its position, once that ground buffer's position is made null, we then kind of, what does he say? He says we evict that chunk and then bring in a new one because we want to start populating more ground with more textures, right? So that's really what day 86 was about. And to go about that, he used essentially the same logic that was in the sim region code to walk the chunks, right, in chunk X, Y, and Z and pull them out. And if they were within, again, a certain range, we could then write a ground buffer texture to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be queried, right? It's all within a certain range, in proximity to the player. It's not like we're querying every chunk. And that's what the sim region code did to begin with, right? So we create a bounds, we get all the chunks out of that bounds, and if the positions of those ground chunks are close enough, we want to draw the ground texture to them, and if not, then we don't. And so to this end, he creates an array, or I guess, I can't remember if he makes an array or just a pointer to all that memory, but I'm pretty sure I use the slice, which is what I wind up doing 99% of the time now. When Casey reaches for an array or, a many item pointer or a multi-pointer, however you want to describe it, a slice tends to work out pretty well for us. But that'll change when we get to like the first day of the renderer stuff, as we'll see next week. But I don't want to get too distracted about that right now. I've been kind of like working ahead. The nice thing about doing things in this new format is I can kind of work ahead, and it allows me to, like, when I come back around to do the stream, I can kind of see, okay, this is where we were coming from. My head is fresh on the stuff that I was just working on, which is like day 88 and then day 89. I can kind of just connect the dots between days a little bit better, if that makes sense. Instead of always just like, okay, my head is in day 85. Okay, that's done. I'm not thinking about it anymore. On to day 86. Like, I actually get to kind of go back and forth and see how we got to the place where we're at, and it makes me just have a better appreciation for the context that each day's work is happening in. So let's see here, and then there's the Q&A. There really wasn't too much today, 86, but I'll go ahead and run this, and then we'll see, and then we'll kind of look at just a little bit of code, and if there's anything interesting. Really, the big thing is the reuse of that sim region code to pull in all the different chunks that we want to actually draw the ground to. And you can see here, all of the chunks are randomly drawn. So there's seams between every single chunk. But now wherever we walk, right, at the end of day 86, now there's terrain. And it actually kind of feels like we're walking through a game world. It's not very interesting. There's no monsters to fight. There's no loot to grab. There's no obstacles. There's no parkour happening. I keep on like thinking about like, okay, if I was going to do this, but have it be a game that like I would want to design, right? Like, what would I put in here? Because I know it's not going to look the same as Casey's, but I don't want to get too tangled up in like going in different directions before he's even implemented any game logic. So I really want to continue to make sure I'm crawling well before I try to walk and run and so forth. So that's that. One thing that I was pretty sure came up last time, and I thought I had a note in here, but maybe I put it in the wrong day. If I go to the front of this, yeah. So I meant to put I see. Okay. So the temporary arena stuff, before I, well, yeah, maybe I'll just go back here and then show, what's going on there. Why is this not, oh, what? How did that happen? Okay. So I did add the note, but I added it, I added it to the right section of the notes, but I did it a day late. So at the very end of last week's stream, I was kind of fiddling with this temp arena stuff. I think I was printing out, you know, the total memory used in the transient arena before and after creating the temporary one, and seeing that that number was staying the same. And I was kind of wondering, like, is it being flushed whether I do this or not? And so what I wound up doing to actually prove that it's doing what it's supposed to do is, I'm pretty sure I just commented all of this out. Right, so we're not creating a temp arena off of the transient states arena. And then, because before it was just showing the same number total used over and over, right? So what I did after commenting this out now is, if I then print out the total memory used in that arena, I can spell everything right. Now we'll actually see that number go up every single frame. And eventually, you know, I would expect that we would run out of memory and the whole thing would crash, right? So now you can see this is incrementing. And all of that is simply to show and prove that using that begin temporary arena and the checking the arena and then ending the temporary arena, all of that is doing exactly what I was hoping it was doing, but I wasn't totally sure, you know, at the end of, and there you go, we finally ran out of memory. So yeah, it was nice to be able to validate that. Of course, there may still be some minutia here that is different from exactly how Casey did his temporary arena, but you know, what do I know? I'm just going off of the docs and trying to sort of infer that what I'm doing is what Casey is doing effectively, but using standard library code, right? Instead of using stuff that we've written ourselves. Not that it's not fun to write things ourselves, but if I can prove that something that's in the core list of packages that does what we would write custom anyways, then let's just use that. At least it's not third party, right? So there is that. So yeah, as far as pulling in those chunks goes, like I was saying, let's see if I can just jump down here and find that. Yeah, so I think this right here is where a majority of the work took place for day 86. I think this code, we were already filling a ground chunk. That's what we were doing. We were doing a test fill. And of course, my window is not wide enough to do this without wrapping. There we go. So we were doing a test fill after drawing all of the ground textures out to their individual chunks. So I think that was simply moved down into here. After all of these buffers were generated during the initialization of the transient state, right? That was what we covered last week. So pulling that test fill out and then doing it so that it'll fill the whole game world meant basically just ripping out the code from the begin sim region call that was written, gosh, probably like 20 plus days ago or something now. And like I said earlier, just iterating over each chunk according to these min and max chunk positions that we are specifying based on the camera bounds that we want to have relative to the actual camera position, right? And you know what I find interesting is that I thought that we had an apron here. Maybe that's not until day 87. is the problem with doing more than one day and a week too. It's like, well, I thought this was going to do this way, but maybe that happened in the later day or the earlier day. Hard to remember. But yeah, we create a camera dimension that uses the screen's width and height in like world space meters, right? Which is calculated based off of the actual size of the draw buffer's width and height multiplied by this kind of arbitrary pixels to meters figure that gets saved to the game state, although I can't remember if that's permanent or not. But what this allows us to do, I'm pretty sure, if I go back up here, is that by changing this number, I can basically change how big or small the world is now, just by changing this one kind of arbitrary number, right? Which is kind of nice. So we do that to get our bounds, and then that's how we use, that's what we use to get the, sort of world space chunk coordinates that we want to pull in to start drawing textures to. And then down in here, you can see that Casey left in this to do, and I actually can't remember. I don't think he actually decides to fix the inefficiency of how this works yet. So it does not get fixed tomorrow, as a matter of fact. But we walk all of those ground buffers, and we see if the ground buffer's position and the center of that chunk that we're iterating through is the same, then it means that we have the ground buffer that we want, right? But if we have a ground buffer without a valid position, then we've found, let me think about this. Here we're breaking, which simply means that we don't need to do any more work to try and fill a ground chunk, right? Because if it's already there, then we don't need to do anything with it. Okay, so that's simple enough. And if we found it, then we can go ahead and draw to it. Right? Oh, no, sorry. This is for the the yellow grid, like the outline that we can see where we can actually draw each chunk. It's more obvious right now because we have the seams in the actual world, but this will actually draw it explicitly for us. And I'm pretty sure it's being drawn like underneath the ground because we actually draw the ground later, right? So this is actually, you can't see what this is doing, but I'll prove that that's doing what I'm saying it's doing when we actually go to rerun the game, because I'll comment out the drawing of the ground texture. So, but if we didn't find it, or sorry, if the ground buffer's position was not valid, then what's kind of weird is I feel like this would always overwrite, like we'd walk every single ground buffer to get an empty buffer, because the goal is that we want all of the ground buffers to be filled, right? It almost seems like we want to break on either case here. Maybe not. No. Okay, so the case that was not explicit here, it's kind of implicit, is that we do have this ground buffer on whatever iteration of this loop is. It does have a valid position, but it's not in the same chunk. However, if it's not valid, then we want to track that so then we can then fill it later with that texture, right? And we denote that here by saying, okay, not only was it not found, but we also have an empty buffer here. And I guess, yeah, sometimes this will mean that this is being overwritten multiple times if we've got multiple ground buffers that aren't valid, but I suppose that doesn't really matter. It kind of just seems like it seems superfluous to overwrite it every single time you find an invalid ground buffer position, but to be fair, that probably doesn't happen very often outside of the first few frames, right? Maybe really not at all after the first frame. Probably overthinking it. So anyway, then by filling all those buffers up there, we then do our temporary arena stuff, and then we walk all the ground buffers to actually draw them out to our frame buffer. And a lot of this logic is, I think, kind of updated for day 86, but it's not particularly new. I think it just kind of makes some accommodations for the fact that we want to draw each buffer relative to the center, right, instead of directly in the center. And then also we flip the Y so that it's actually going in the direction that we want to go in. And having to deal with this is like one of the things that was like the impetus for Casey to switch gears and start talking about the renderer, right? So, okay, so what I was saying, right, is that if I comment this out, then we'll just see our yellow grid, if I can use my editor properly. Because now we have filled ground chunks, but we never go to draw them, right? But we are drawing the outline when we go to see if we need to fill new ground chunks or evict old ones. I guess actually, does this loop evict chunks at all? I would think somewhere in here we have to set the chunk to have a null position. See, that's during startup, but where else would we be doing that? I guess I don't remember where the eviction is taking place. Maybe it's not taking place at all. In fact, that might not have been something that we got around to in day 86. And what does that mean? If I uncomment this and then rebuild and rerun, and we start walking through our game world, once we get to the edge of like all of the number of chunks that we have, we should see just gray space again, right? And then we'll see that grid pop up underneath it. It's either that or I have completely missed that code where we're actually evicting the chunks. How many chunks are even... I think there might be like 200 something. So in that case, let's see. I keep using chunks and buffers interchangeably, but this is what I mean. Buffers. So where are we going to make them? We have a ground buffer count, 128. So let's just make it 12. And then I was probably like right at the very edge where you would start to see the ground chunk grid sort of popping underneath, but there you go. So we're only making enough to draw kind of the perimeter there around the player. But again, it seems kind of strange to me. I guess because the camera bounds... Yeah, whatever chunk is inside of the camera bounds, it'll always fill out to the edges. So that's why we weren't seeing any chunks missing, I guess, from the outside of the terrain, right? So anyway, hopefully that kind of conveys what I was trying to get across. I know this is obviously, if you want the the real scoop, go and watch Handmade Hero, right? Because I'm just doing a poor imitation of it at this point and just kind of showcasing what it is that I'm picking up and learning from what he's done, right? I'm mining the gold out of it, as he would say about it, but I'm mining it for myself and just kind of sharing my progress, and that's really all I can hope to offer, right? Hey Devil, how's it going? What's up, Cash? Good to hear from you. Little dude looks pissed. Yeah, he's you know, he does have no arms or legs, and I won't speak for anybody else that has no arms or legs, but you know, I wouldn't be very happy about that either. But at least he has his body. I mean, this guy over here to the left just has a head, doesn't even have a torso. So anyway, I think that's pretty much it for day 86, and that leads perfectly into day 87 because that's where the actual eviction starts happening, and that's when we actually get the seamless tiles, right? So let me go ahead and jump into main. I changed something? That's right, because I commented... Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, whatever. Too bad, so sad. If it wraps again, it wraps again. So that brings us to day 87. Let me bring up some notes here. Oh, okay. So in the very first minutes of day 87, Casey talks about a state initialization bug where he was trying to, inside of this startup here, inside of this transient state initialization code, up here, when he goes to create an arena from it, he actually gives the transient storage size member from his memory to the arena to create it, and it somehow works miraculously. And I had to go and look at my own code to make sure that I didn't somehow do the same thing, and I didn't, right? I'm actually using the transient storage, and it just seems like something that wouldn't have been possible at all, right, doing things this way with Odin, because I can't, like, I would have to somehow not realize that my memory is supposed to be coming from my slice, which has this buffer of memory, right, for the transient memory. I would have to screw that up so bad, and it seems just... I'm not saying I couldn't make that mistake, but it seems like the chances of me making that mistake with Odin and the fact that it has slices are just very minimal. So that kind of made me happy to see. Just another win for Odin, I guess. Not that it's like... It's not like this is a killer feature or something to have slices, and that's not like Odin's the first language to have slices. It's just... I probably could have made that mistake a lot. I would be more likely to make the same mistake Casey made if I didn't have him, right? So going into day 87, yep, like I covered just a few minutes ago, we still have the seams between each of the chunks, and then we want to be able to handle eviction, right? So at first I thought we did that in day 86, but that was day 87. So to do the seamless tiles, and you'll have to bear with me because I didn't fully grasp, and I watched that segment several times. It really flew over my head a bit, because I just don't understand how it works mechanically. I can like look at the code and read the code back and make sense of it and all that, but I don't understand why the textures do look seamless in the end because of this implementation that he shows. So basically what he does is inside of the code where we're filling the ground chunks, he does some iteration over like a 3x3 grid and then splats all of the texture over that whole grid so that it overlaps each chunk, if that makes sense. And I guess the way that it works is it makes it continuous from like whichever chunk you're at, all of the other chunks around it have been splatted before, right? And so you know like how it has this continuation of like wherever the center chunk is, you've got the splats around the edges of it that link up with the next chunk, right? It's something like that, but again, I'm not going to try and pretend like I totally understand it because I don't. Handling eviction, though, I do understand a bit better, and it simply checks the distance. To do that, we simply check the distance that each chunk is from the player, right? Which I said before. And then if it's far enough from wherever the player or the game camera is, then we drop that and we set its position to null so that that ground chunk can then be used to fill in a new ground buffer. Oh, yes, and then there was a bug. I don't know if it was a bug as much as it was just kind of a weird drawing behavior because the sort of detail textures were being drawn inside of the same loop with the sort of more base terrain, like the actual dirt and grass, right? It was overwriting the detail, and the only detail we have is those little like grass patches, right? And so it just basically what it looked is that what it looked like is that those little grass textures that splat on top of the main terrain texture, they were just like clumped together in a square inside of each chunk, and so that you could still, even though there were no seams between each chunk, you could see that they were all splatted and clumped together, and it made it look as though there were chunks. But the whole point of doing all this work for like the past 4 days, right? And maybe going back even a little bit further, pretty much like probably day 80 through day 87 now, is to have like a seamless ground texture that looks like a real game world that we can walk around in. And then let's see. Oh yeah. And then at the very end of day 87, we get all of that working, and then Casey adds this flag to check whether the game executable has been reloaded, so that if it has, then, and we want to change stuff with the ground texture drawing code, then we can do that. And I'll demonstrate that because why not, right? So this is what things look like at the day, end of day 87. It's kind of cool to see the evolution from just having that one little square in the middle, right, to going to like a seamed kind of obvious texture between, or obvious separation between textures on each ground chunk. Now we have this seamless game world, except for one little spot. And that is, you can see right here in the bottom left, for some reason there's still a seam between this bottom left chunk in the room and everything outside of it. And I don't know why that's happening. I looked at it for a little bit, but I decided ultimately, like, if I was going to try and fix that, one thing I wanted to do was see if it was actually a problem with my Zig project as well. Because if it wasn't, right, that would tell me that I did something wrong here. But I suspect that it is a problem for that Zig project, and probably even with Casey's code too, but he probably never sees it because for whatever reason he doesn't wander over to this corner much, right? Whenever he's testing the game, he's like going off and exploring the rest of the world, and that issue, that bug, doesn't appear to show up anywhere else. So just a small thing, but a problem nonetheless. The past 86 days have melded together in my mind. Yeah, it's, again, I think that's why it's been nice to kind of change things up and do things this way, because it really gives me the opportunity to digest what the hell is going on. Because as you can see, I only covered 2 days in the past week, but even revisiting it, I've written all the code, I've watched the Handmade Hero episodes, I've written down notes, and I'm still like having to really think carefully about what actually happened so that I don't sound like I'm talking complete nonsense, right? So let's actually look at the code, and then we'll touch on the Q&As if there was anything interesting that happened in there. Hey Jonathan, what's up? I watched a few of Ginger Bill's videos. He mentioned that he would have never made Odin without Casey's Handmade series and a podcast. Pretty cool. Yeah, I think I saw an interview where he said something similar, right? And it's not hard to believe, right? When you look at the programming content that's out there in general, a lot of it does not go as deep as Casey does with Handmade Hero. There's a lot of like very, very niche stuff that is specific to like one thing or another that is good for what it is, but it's like all about that specific application. So like web programming or doing like data pipeline, data engineering type stuff, or rendering. Like there's a guy, I'm trying to remember his name. I think his first name is Arseny. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I can't remember his last name, but he has a Vulkan rendering series called, I think it's called Niagara, right? If I'm remembering this wrong, then I apologize, but I'm pretty sure that's his name, and that's the name of the series, and he's just showing how to do a Vulkan renderer in C++, right? And what little I've been able to churn through with that series, it seems pretty good, and I see a lot of other people speaking highly of his series. So if and when I get a little bit deeper into rendering stuff, I'll probably take a closer look at that. So focused on the shit in front that you didn't notice the stink right behind you. Yeah, That is a very apt description of, you know, really how I've been approaching the series thus far. Even when I was doing it in Zig, I was in such a hurry to get to the next day that I just was totally like, there's just not enough time for the stuff from the previous day to really sink in and be repeatable, right? Like I want a lot of these things to be repeatable, or at least I want to be able to recall if I run into a similar problem that is addressed over the course of Handmade Hero trying to do a custom thing. I want to be able to think back, hold on, I've done something like this before, or we had to deal with a problem like this in Handmade Hero, right? Like what day was that, and like what was the actual, like was it, you know, entity storage related, was it rendering related, all these different things, right? But absolutely, like watching Handmade Hero, there's a lot of things positive that have happened for me over the course of my career that most likely wouldn't have had as good of an impact on my career without Handmade Hero, because I was able to understand things more quickly and solve a problem more quickly, especially during COVID. There were some things that were happening because of the nature of my job that made it I made a lot of people happy. I don't know if I made them happy so much as I helped them not be very angry at me for being too slow on getting some work done, that I don't know that I could have gotten it done as quickly without having watched Handmade Hero, even initially, because I only got through like the first 30 days way back when. And that's I'm pretty sure that's what Bill says, and I'm pretty sure that's what I've heard other people say, that even if you only watch like the first 30 to 40 days of Handmade Hero, you'll get a ton out of that is like applicable to everything, not just, you know, games programming. So anyway, the seamless stuff, if we go into fill ground chunk now, let's see, you can see that we've added some stuff here. Before we were just checking to see if a ground buffer was not valid, and then we would write to an empty buffer. Empty buffer is now furthest buffer, right? Because the furthest buffer is the one that we're going to evict, right? If we need to. At least I think so. Yeah, if every buffer is not in the same chunk. So if it's already valid, we check to see the furthest buffer length. If whatever the current furthest buffer length is, and I think you normalized it to 0. We're going to track that. Yeah, I know he did not normalize it. So it's either going to be 0 or whatever the max floating point value is. So by tracking that, now we can overwrite whatever the furthest buffer is with new ground texture to fill the world as we're traversing it, right? And there isn't much else there, but if we go in here, this is where that issue with, well, first of all, this is the solution to the whole seamless thing, right? You can see that we walk in chunks relative to whatever the chunk it is that we actually care about, to splat outside of the edges of that chunk to get that seamless effect. I guess just looking at it here, it's not, I probably was overthinking it, because it just seems like if you, by giving yourself splats outside of whatever just the core chunk it is, you're going to get that overlap, right? I mean, the thing that I have trouble with, I think, is that at the end of the day, you're still just writing to a 256 by 256 square. So it's got to be more to do with the continual nature of it. And the fact that these things are static to a seed being reset on the chunk. Like, in my head, I would think that that would change it and you would lose that seamless effect, but I'm not sure. I'd probably have to go through it one more time to really understand what's going on there. Maybe go on the Handmade forums and read some posts where people talked about these few days, because it's tough for me to really understand why that's happening. Maybe if we only drew one chunk, maybe that's the thing to do, and then we could just see what it looks like. But I'm pretty sure we just cover that one chunk, right? If we go over here, right, and we draw, let's draw 2 instead of 1, and we'll run it and see. Actually, that's not going to work, is it? Because it's going to constantly be evicting them. Oh, no, it'll just go according to whichever one we're on, right? Yeah. So we'll always have 2 chunks drawn. And you can see that it fills it in. Whichever one we're on, and then there's just a random one. I guess it starts from the top right, it looks like. Yeah. It's always going to be the top right. Is that right? Yeah. Anyway. Well, like I was saying with the clumped together grass textures, we have a separate loop that essentially does the same thing, but it draws in those grass tufts after the fact. Whereas before, this was in the same loop as up here. And so it was causing those tufts to be kind of masked out, I suppose. And I think that really might be it. Let me check the diffs real quick, because I don't think that there was too much else to talk about. There's the whole executable reloaded thing, this flag here, right, which sets all of the ground buffer positions to null so that they are forced to be redrawn. And I guess I did say that I was gonna show what that looks like. So let's say we are, here's what I'll do. Let me build, and then we'll run. If I can run the right thing. So we have our fancy ground textures, and we have these little grass details everywhere. But if we then comment this out, whoops, if I can do so properly, and then rebuild the game, they'll go away. All right, so now we just have the sort of bare texture there. And that's just, you know, enabling the hot reloading for this particular system, right? Because the ground would never be redrawn elsewise if you didn't have some way to invalidate it, which is what we do there. Let me see, null position. Yeah, we do that there. I don't think... Yeah, so it's not that we mark the position null to evict them. We do that when we want to redraw everything. So instead of marking it as null, we just check the distance for eviction. Yeah. I think that all makes sense. I probably did a poor job explaining it, but I think that's okay. So the Q&A stuff. Let's see if there was anything interesting in there. Oh yeah, someone asked him about getting started with programming and choosing a language, and his answer was basically whatever gets you into programming, I think. Or maybe that was just my answer. But I think what he did say was that, like, choose something a little bit simpler to get started, and then once you've gotten like a feel for what programming is like, then you can start diving into more nitty-gritty stuff. And so that's like, you know, the difference between, like, if you were to get into web stuff, right, messing with some JavaScript, doing some dynamic stuff with that, and writing up some HTML versus like, okay, I'm gonna pull down Ruby on Rails, or I'm gonna, you know, start building web apps with React or whatever. For me, I just remember struggling so much more. Like, I still struggle today. But I basically gave up on Handmade Hero because I felt like way too much was going over to my head, where I was just rote copying everything he was doing. So I gave up probably like around day 25 to 30. And now years later, I can make it relatively comfortably to day 100. But even in doing it twice in two different languages, it still feels like new revelations are happening all the time, which I think is like a really rewarding aspect of doing programming. But one thing, and I'll talk about this, I think, from like kind of the inverse perspective a little bit, which is like, how do you stay with continuing to learn new languages and new topics when you've gotten far enough into programming as like a career, something that you do for work, and continue to maintain that motivation when you're no longer incentivized to just get a job doing that thing, right? I think that's like a pretty common phenomenon. And like some people are not wired in such a way that they even care about these things. Some people just want to get better at whatever their specific niche is that they've fallen into. Me, I've got what I'm good at that I do to earn a living, but it's not something that I'm particularly passionate about, at least not for the type of work. I'm passionate about it in some respects for the actual like impact that it has, but not for technical reasons, because technically what's happening is not even that interesting, honestly. The hard parts, the hard problems being solved are actually navigating all of the little sort of people dimensions to things where you're trying to figure out what somebody actually needs and what the actual problem is. Like those tend to be the tougher problems more so than a technical thing. But I found that coming back to Handmade Hero over the last year and really getting reacquainted with doing this kind of programming, like I forgot how much fun it could be, and how exciting it was to get deep with some of this stuff. And it's brought a new sort of life into doing that that kind of work more, where I have to deal with people, right, and figuring out requirements and just understanding what the hell is actually going on. It's just two very different things, and it's easy to feel stale with either of them, because I'll never run out of like really technical stuff to learn, right? Especially with something like Handmade Hero. If I just keep going with it, it will get to a point where I just feel like, man, like, am I ever going to actually be able to make a game? I think at some point I'll be able to make something very simple and rudimentary, right? Like one idea that I've been playing around with lately is just making like a little train game, where you can basically, the objective of the game is to either keep the train from derailing, if that is what you, to get a high score or whatever, if that's what you care about, keep the train from derailing as long as you can. Or if you're like I was when I was playing Flight Simulator when I was a kid, I just wanted to crash the plane as in as spectacular a way as possible, so maybe derailing the train. And that's all just motivated by this insane love for trains that my kid has at this age. Trains are just everything. So I don't know. That's kind of the one game idea that might be sticking, but I'm not 100% on it yet. We'll see. So anyway, and then I have some other notes here about Z buffers and deferred rendering. I don't think there's anything in there that I can say that's useful to anybody. So I'm just gonna brush over that. Oh yes, in day 87, somebody either mentioned or asked about using C++, and Casey said, and keep in mind this was in like 2015, he said in 5 years we'll have moved on from C++. Regrettably, it is 10 years later and C++ is still alive and well. And I do say regrettably, but like the truth is like I know a lot of people really enjoy writing C++, probably because you still can't do too much in the gaming industry without C++. I know a lot of people are using .NET as well, C#, I mean. And what's another one? I guess a lot of people who might be doing like mobile stuff are probably using Swift or something. But yeah, what is different now though is that I've seen Zig and Odin and Rust as well pick up a ton of steam. But Rust is a special case where even though you have some projects that are really well funded for like doing game engines in Rust, there still aren't too many games, especially not in any mainstream sense. Like I don't think any AAAs are doing anything with Rust. Maybe certain back-end things, but they're probably not writing like the entire game engine that they're using for some exciting new game in Rust. It's not to say that I'm not saying that that isn't happening. It's just that I'm not aware of that happening anywhere. Maybe it is for all I know. I don't know. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. There is this little issue that I think we can see in the game if I boot it up here. Actually, no, it's not showing up. Why is that? If I go into my build script here, yeah, I think you'll see it if I turn optimization off. And that is simply that every time we go onto a new chunk, you can see the game kind of hitches a little bit there. It stutters, it freezes ever so briefly as it's pulling in new ground chunks. And I actually think it's kind of nice to see that, because that really illustrates like what work was done on that particular day. You know, like that's why we're seeing that slowdown, is because of the work we did to evict new chunks and then write to new ones, right? New ground buffers, draw new ground buffers, and write them into new chunks, right? And then as we go back, we start to see the same effect as we start loading in the chunks that were previously evicted. So it just kind of gives you, like, it's always nice to be able to have like a visual kind of understanding there. Whereas if I turn optimization on, if I turn it back on, and I think this probably speaks well of Odin and all of the code that's been written thus far, because we just have like a very, it's not even a real software renderer really, but you don't even see that stutter at all if I have optimization turned on, right? It just moves really buttery smooth through the game world, and we can just keep going. There's 2,000 rooms and there's nothing in them, and there's really that's the only gameplay. This is truly a walking simulator, walking from room to room. They're all drawn the same. Sometimes the doors are to the right, sometimes they're up above, but it's always the same thing. But in next week's stream, we'll actually get to reintroduce staircases and get to see how that screws everything up as we talk more about the renderer. But that's pretty much all I had. So my dumb self back in high school chose C++ slash CLI as my first programming language. Managed C++, complete nightmare. Yeah, especially what I have heard is that because the industry had no hope of moving away from C++ in the last 10 years, right? A lot of people did push for certain aspects of it to be dialed back and new features to be added to like deal with a lot of the concerns that people have writing C++. And so it's become a more pleasant experience in very recent years, but like 2010-ish, right? It would have been hellish, I suppose. I want to take a look at the code real quick and make sure I didn't miss anything cool. Oh, we have this draw mat call that we can use to draw like holes in the world, which I could show off, but I don't think it will. Check out day 87 of Handmade Hero to see that if you are so inclined. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much all of that. So a couple of relatively easy days, honestly. It's been nice not getting turned around and creating bugs for myself because I wasn't paying attention and I was trying to stream. So the actually working through the code of each day has been easier, not doing it live. But of course, that means that I'm working harder to get an understanding about like conceptually what's going on. And it's perfect timing, like I said at the beginning of the stream, because we're heading into the renderer stuff next, and I'm going to do my best to do a better job of explaining that, because that's a topic that like I legitimately want to become more well versed in. And the only way to get really good at something or to prove that you've gotten really good at something is to be able to explain it well to other people, right? So that's a big incentivization for me. And I'm still going to be, you know, pretty amateurish and a novice on a lot of this stuff. But over time, right, that expertise starts to build. You start to get intuition for things. And like I'm coming back around to topics that were totally foreign to me the first time. And now that I'm kind of in that world a little bit with some of my studying, I guess you would call it, it's starting to come together more. So just to memory edit a 2D platformer game to cheat. Yeah, but that would be a really cool thing to do, to be able to do in high school, to be fair. Like if you could put that on a resume. for a junior position, that would probably go a long way. Then again, I've thought to myself, if I can do Odinmade Hero, if I can do Handmade Hero and Odin and Zig, like clearly somebody's going to care about that. Nobody really cares. Other people that do the hobbyist thing care, but like no employer really cares. At least none that I've tried to reach out to you. To be fair, I have not been aggressively applying for jobs or anything like that. Oh yeah, that is disgusting. Convert string to stood. How come? That's weird. I'm sorry. I thought I had my chat up. I guess OBS didn't save my settings. I was wondering why I wasn't seeing my chat. Stood, string, static, stood, string, convert system to stood. Yeah, that's a terrible. Yeah, that particular operator, I like Odin's use of it to like declare procedures, right? And types and constants. But like if I'm just having to write regular code and I'm having to do this : thing everywhere, it's gonna make me want to evacuate my colon. Should have started in C# instead of C++. You know, at the same time, if you have that exposure to C++, C#, the learning curve to C# becomes that much easier, right? I think that's a tough thing for a lot of people that probably start out with something like Ruby or Python or whatever, and then they get into something like C++ or Rust, and it can create this sensation where it's like, man, I thought I knew what I was doing, but now I'm trying to write C and C++, and I just feel like a noob all over again. And that, to be honest, that was how it felt getting into Zig last year, and then even again getting into Odin. I felt a bit more comfortable getting into Odin, and I think that's partially thanks to Odin, but also just having worked through a bunch of Handmade Hero and Zig. I had a college project which was a bomb defusal program where you had to memory edit the program with the right result or else it would blow up and you'd fail the project. I remember having to do something similar to that. I might have done something like that. Yeah, I might have had like an operating systems project that was like that, but probably not exactly the same. I definitely just, the whole point, right, is to edit the memory of the program to get a different result. And I remember getting a few prompts like that. Yeah, you might not be able to choose a harder language than C++ as a first language. Maybe Rust, or obviously some of the like very kind of low-hanging fruits one, but low-hanging fruit ones like Brainfuck or something like that. But I don't think that's a serious, like, you're not making a serious attempt there if you're just going to start off with like, oh, I'm going to do this as a joke, learn some Brainfuck. Something like that's actually like an industry standard. Perl would be a brutal one as a first language. I would rather write C++ or Rust than Perl as a first language. Trying to think if there's any other ones. I've heard that Haskell is really hard, but I've never actually tried to write any Haskell before. Brainfuck goated. Not for me. Not for me. I think it's neat that it works. I think it's neat that it exists, but I don't know. One that I've been hearing a lot about, I wouldn't say a lot about, I guess. I see people still talking about it, is Beef programming language, which is kind of, looking at it here, it gives me like C# vibes a little bit, but it's supposed to be really nice, but it's not memory managed. It's like garbage collected, right? Yeah, you can see here, public static void main, let game app equals scope game app. I'm not sure what's going on with this scope keyword here, but then you just call start on your game app. Oh, and it's got that like dot notation too for, I'm guessing that's an enum. You want to start the game in full screen. I don't know. I haven't looked at Beef much. I'm pretty happy with Odin. I've continued to be happy with Odin. Like for all of my hobbyist stuff, which has really just been, I got pretty decently far with going down the road of trying to write a Vulkan renderer in Odin, and then I hit one wall in particular. I've mentioned it a few times now. Whoops. I hit one wall in particular that just killed all my motivation to get further with that, but I'm sure I'll come back around to it. And to be fair, I think if I was trying to do that project not in Molten VK, I was on my my MacBook trying to do Molten VK with Odin, and that actually wasn't the problem. The problem was trying to import the Vulkan memory allocator library, making that work on MacBook. I don't know. It's probably possible if I was trying to write C++ on my MacBook, because I was trying to do it with Odin. I couldn't quite connect the dots. I'll come back around to it. But if I was doing it on my Windows machine, I'm sure it'd be fine. Oh my gosh. That looks exactly like C#. Yeah, it gives me a lot of C# vibes, but I don't remember ever seeing... You're talking about beef, right? Yeah. It gives me a lot of C# vibes, but I don't remember a scope keyword in C#. Come to think of it, I don't know if I remember let either. I'm used to only seeing let in, like... When's the last time I even wrote that? It would have been for something JavaScript related. Bachware, welcome. Hey man, I've been watching you on the sideline for a bit. Good stuff. I found you because I'm also doing the exact same thing, but I'm way further behind than you. Well, more power to you. I hope you catch up and surpass me, and you probably will, depending on how fast you're going. I encourage anybody to look at the platform layer code, which is public on my GitHub. It'll be in the description of this stream on YouTube. Whenever I get around to updating it, I always fill in the... Actually, I think the description sticks around now, but I always update the title later. So yeah, that's like a great proof of concept for, like, you can do this project in Odin, and seeing as how I'm closing in on day 100, you can totally do Handmade Hero in Odin. Right on. Yeah, same with you, Jonathan. Keep at it. I'd love to hear your guys' progress as you work through it, and just tell me, like, what do you struggle with? What kind of Odin tricks are you picking up along the way, or, like, what other kind of neat projects you're coming across? This part of the main reason for this stream is because I'm interested in seeing what other people are doing in a similar space. I've come to audio, and he's going to implement direct sound. What did you do in this case? There aren't any direct sound bindings for Odin. Yeah, so I just used SDL. So all of the audio stuff, I followed the Handmade Penguin. I'll just drop my repo for the platform layer in the chat so that you can see that, because that's going to show you exactly how I did in Odin, right? If I can copy and paste correctly. And then you'll see in the README of that repo, I'm pretty sure I linked out to Handmade Penguin, which shows, I did things a little bit differently from the Handmade Penguin stuff, but that shows doing audio with SDL. And so that, I pretty much just did that one-to-one with Odin. I didn't try to do the Win32 bindings in Odin like I did for Zig. But I imagine if you wanted to try doing the direct sound thing, you would need the Win32 bindings for Odin, which I think would be another, like, a third-party project you'd have to pull in. I'm pretty sure you could do it. I just wanted to be able to work on the project on my MacBook, so that's why I went with SDL instead. Read up on Dreambird if you want a good laugh of a language. I'll check it out. Where am I? Dreambird programming language. The perfect programming language. All right, let's see it. Hello world. If you're feeling bold, you can use what? You can use an exclamation mark. End every statement with an exclamation mark. Are you serious, Clark? If you're unsure, that's okay. You can put a question mark at the end of a line instead. You might be wondering what Dreambird uses for the not operator, which is an exclamation mark in most other languages. That's simple. The not is a semicolon instead. Okay. You're just swapping them. There are 4 types of declaration. Constants can't be changed in any way. Constant variables can be edited but not reassigned. Yeah, this is hell. This is hell on earth right here. Const name. The, honestly, I would find this funnier if I hadn't come across tables, like database tables in the wild that are named like this. Tables that I have to deal with for my day job. Oh, and if const wasn't enough, you can have a const. New for 2023. Okay. Yeah, that's a programming language, all right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, no problem. No problem. Not really interested in creating another side project inside a side project, so I'll probably do the same. Yeah, I wanted to take the path of least resistance to get right back into as much of the game stuff as possible, because with like platform layer stuff, if I knew, like at this point, having done Handmade Hero, at least the platform layer stuff in C++, well, C flavored C++, right? Having done that, having done it in Zig with the Win32 bindings, and now having done it in Odin with SDL, I'm pretty confident that if I was in a situation where I needed to target any platform in whatever language, be it Odin or C, then like I would have a rough idea of how to get there, right? Like it wouldn't. Now I've got the tools, and so at this point now, I just want to be able to like write the game that I want to write, and so SDL was the choice to make there. Now, you could also look at Raylib, and I actually started working on a platform layer in Raylib, and it seemed like it was going to work just fine, but I couldn't get controller input working on my MacBook, and so that instantly made me lose my motivation to use it. And I don't know if that was Raylib's fault or a fault of the bindings or Odin's fault. Like, I really don't know what was responsible for that, but I just didn't feel like troubleshooting it anymore, because again, I just wanted to get the project to a point where I could be like following Casey along and getting into like I you know, because I only got to like day 120 or whatever in Zig. I want to go beyond that. I want to get to the OpenGL stuff. I want to be able to then take what I've learned from following Casey's implementation of the render in OpenGL and apply that in a Vulkan render as well. And I feel like that'll really connect all the dots for me, because if you can re-implement the same thing in Vulkan that you've done in OpenGL, like it's for the same reason it's been beneficial to me to do Handmade Hero and not just Zig but also Odin. Like there's a lot of contextual stuff that you can pull out of having that experience, and it's made me better at my day job for sure. Like I've seen a direct benefit, and now I'm more efficient with the stuff that I do for my day job. I know exactly, there's a lot of stuff that I might have wasted time doing, you know, like 2 years ago that I know not to do now, because of just it's not even as much the concepts, it's just like the kind of the work, the perspective on like what's worth doing versus what's worth not doing, that I've come away with strengthening through doing the Handmade Hero stuff. So I hope that if you're following along with Handmade Hero and doing it yourself too, whether it's in Odin or some other language, that it has a similar benefit for you. But if not, if you're just doing it for the fun of it, you know, for the sake of learning and an interest in how games work, because that's also a big motivation for me, then, you know, that's great too. So that's all I've got time for today. Thank you for all of you for showing up. Best of luck to you in your Handmade Hero pursuits and just game dev pursuits in general, if that's something that you're also aspiring to do. I'll be back next week to talk about starting the software renderer, and I'm really looking forward to that. As I've been saying for a long time, it's finally here. It's finally time to dive into rendering, and that'll be pretty rewarding, I think. So have a great weekend wherever you are, and I will see you next time. Take care.